I gotta say, I am so sick of hearing about the thief on the cross. You can be talking to someone about theology, about salvation, and there will always be that one person, what about the thief on the cross? He didn't do any of that and he was saved. And I'm sick of this argument. I don't like it. I think it's presented very wrong, and it's not something we should aim towards. I think it justifies spiritual laziness, and it's not something we should be preaching and thinking is amazing. And I don't want to make this a Catholic Protestant issue, but typically Protestants, more specifically the non-denominational Protestants, like to use this example to justify plain out laziness. And I think it's very clear that the thief on the cross is not our model, is not our role model for faith. But instead, it's an exception, and that's all it is. And for context with this argument, if you're not too familiar with the thief on the cross, basically when Jesus is being crucified, he has two people, two thieves on either side of him. One of them laughs at Jesus, mocks him, tells him to make a miracle, take him off the crosses. The other one, on the other hand, says, no, we deserve to be here. Jesus does not deserve to be here. He's the Son of God. I believe in Jesus. Jesus, will you welcome me into the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus says, yes, you will be in paradise with me. Basically, that's what it is. The thief on the cross is saved by Jesus at the last second before he dies. And Protestants like to use this, again, more specifically non-denominational Christians, like to use this to justify the idea of grace over works. You don't need works to be saved. You don't need baptism, all of that stuff. And as a Catholic, I do agree. And I think that story is amazing. I think it's amazing how at the last second he can put his faith in Jesus and he's saved. I think that shows the power of Jesus' saving grace. And I don't want anyone to confuse that. I do think it's possible on your deathbed to have a genuine conversion and to be saved. I don't think that you have to go down and get baptized or you have to do any works. I want to make that very clear from the get-go. But I do think it's very important when we read the story of the thief on the cross to realize that it's very descriptive, but it's not prescriptive. It's not telling us how to live out our faith. Instead, it's just describing what happened to this specific person. And it's a very powerful story. But again, I don't think it's prescribing us on how we should live out our faith, which I see many non-denominational people preaching sometimes. And that's where the problem comes in. I think it's very clear that it's cherry picking. It's cherry picking a theology that just promotes laziness, that promotes lukewarm Christianity. And we don't need any more of that in our world today. I think when people preach this story, in many cases, it can cause people to be complacent, to say, I'll get right later. It's fine. Look at the thief on the cross. If we make them into this whole model and this example, then more and more people are going to say, no, I'll just get right later. I'll live my life exactly the way I want to live it now, but later I'll put my faith in God. But I think we all know that's not a genuine conversion. That's not someone surrendering to Christ like we see on the thief on the cross. And my worst fear is that we're going to reduce faith to a deathbed decision. We're going to reduce the Christian lifestyle to just saying I believe in Jesus right before we die. And that's very scary. And as Christians, we should know that this is a very serious topic. This is eternity we're talking about here. We should not fool around with it. We should not put it off. We don't know when we're going to leave. We don't know when we're going to die. And I don't like how this story promotes complacency. It promotes a deathbed decision. And at its heart, I don't think it really does. I think it just shows the exception. That if you mistakenly live your life away from Christ, and at the end of your life, if you're convinced He is God, then you are going to be able to be saved. That's what the story is really all about. And another thing that irks me about this whole story is, what about the other commandments? Why is our whole theology structured around the thief on the cross? What about James 2:17, faith without works is dead? What about when Jesus says, deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me? What about when Jesus talks about the Eucharist, talks about baptism? Do we just throw that out the door because of the thief on the cross? I don't think so. I think the thief on the cross was a very special exception, and Jesus outlines how we should live our Christian life all throughout the Gospels. So to ignore all of that and just take that one story as your theology is very scary, and it's not good. Because at the end of the day, the thief on the cross didn't have the privilege to follow Jesus. He didn't have the privilege to live out his faith. That's what it comes down to. We have the privilege to live out our Christian life. We have the privilege to not be up on a cross facing death. And I'm sure if Jesus met the thief on the cross some other time when he wasn't dying, before he was dying, and the thief on the cross had genuine faith, then he would live it out. He would have gotten baptized. He would have lived the Christian life. Now, of course, I'm just speculating, but it's not like the apostles and early church fathers threw out baptism, threw out everything because of the thief on the cross. I think it's clear out of the earliest followers of Jesus that the thief on the cross was an exception. It was not the end-all be-all. And that's ultimately because the thief on the cross didn't have the privilege to follow. But we do. We have the privilege to live the Christian life, and we should. And again, I just want to make it clear, this is still a very powerful story, and it shows the power of Jesus' grace and forgiveness. That you can live your life away from Christ, and right before you die, you can give your life to Him genuinely, and you will be saved. But it's not something that we should bank on. It shouldn't be our plan A. It should be our plan B, C, or even Z, our last plan, our last route. So I think we should take it as such. It was a great exception. Amazing. Great story. But that's not how we're going to live our Christian life. We're going to look at the gospel as a whole, and we're not going to let our theology be dictated by one story. We're going to look at all of Jesus' commandments. We're going to live in alignment to God. And you don't have to be a Catholic to believe that. I think many Protestants do believe that. And I think as a Protestant or non-denominational, you can adopt that belief. You can live out your faith. And even as a Catholic, we need to see more of this. We need to see more people living out their faith. Because at the end of the day, who should we model our faith around? Should we model our faith around the thief on the cross or Jesus? Because at times it feels like some people model their faith more around the thief on the cross than Jesus, our God, our Lord. So let's recognize that we follow Jesus, not the thief on the cross. And let's not ignore the model that was set by Jesus, the high bar that was set by Him, the high bar that we need Him to fulfill for us. We need Him to die for us. We need to put our faith in Him. Let's not ignore that. Let's not be like the thief on the cross. Let's be more like Jesus instead of the thief. And that's why I'm so tired of hearing about the thief on the cross. We get it. Great story, great exception, but we don't want to live that way. We have the privilege to follow Jesus, and we should.